When it comes to the law of self-defense, you'll often hear people speak of the reasonable man or reasonable person standard. You might be wondering just who this reasonable person is and what this really means. The idea of a fictitious reasonable person has its beginning in Old English law, which is the source of many of our modern American legal concepts. It was first used in a civil lawsuit in 1837, where a person stacked piles of hay on the property that they rented in such a way that it was prone to spontaneously igniting. Despite being repeatedly warned about the danger, the defendant did nothing and, as expected, the hay caught fire and ended up destroying two of the landlord's cottages. The landlord sued his tenant, and the court applied the reasonable man standard and found that while the defendant may not have appreciated the risk, a truly reasonable person would have. So he was found responsible and ordered to pay damages. The reasonable person standard is an objective one, and it requires the level of caution that an ordinarily prudent person would exercise in substantially similar circumstances. The idea of a reasonable man or reasonable person has also been applied in the criminal law, where someone has used force to defend him or herself. Nearly every state's laws require that when force be used, it be used only when reasonable. And so the question that prosecutors, judges, and juries must decide is whether a reasonable person would have used force in the same circumstances. Now, since this reasonable person doesn't actually exist, the prosecutor instead will have to ask himself or herself, what would a jury think if I presented the facts? If the prosecutor believes that the jury would agree that the use of force was reasonable, they most likely will choose not to bring criminal charges. On the other hand, if the prosecutor believes that a potential jury would find the use of force unreasonable, then they most likely will file criminal charges. Keep in mind that the average jury is picked from the community, not from your local shooting club.